anything core, I'm not gonna
Well, welcome everybody tonight to the Cayce Historical Museum. My name is Andy Thomas. I'm the curator at the museum, and we do have some of our museum commissioners here. So if they could stand up or raise their hand. Okay. We have Mr. David Brinkman back here. Okay. We have Ms. Pamela Sultan here. Who else? And when we introduce, we'll tell you about one other. Okay. If you haven't been to our museum, we've got some brochures out there. It's worth coming by and seeing us if you're interested in the history of this area. We do the whole gamut from Native American prehistoric history all the way through the 20th century. So not a bad admission charge, so come by and see us sometime. I also want to promote, because I've got some of my 12,000 Year History folks here who lead tours down at 12,000 Year History Park. This is a great tour, and these folks give some good tours. They do tours on Native Americans, they do tours on the forts that were located there, and they do tours on the Civil War battle that took place down there. So if you're looking for those tours, pick up one of these brochures, go to their site and look for the dates. I think the next tour is the 30th, and that's going to be a Civil War tour, is that right? So sign up for that and be a part of that. Just for housekeeping, the restroom is back here to your left, if you go back that way. The Cayce Museum tries to do lectures like this every month. We've done some lectures on things like the creation of sweetgrass baskets. We've done a lecture on brick making and talked about the gated brickworks. We did a lecture on the Doolittle Raiders. And so we try to incorporate the local history here and have a person come out who has expertise in that area to present. And obviously we're real excited about our presenter tonight. So I'm going to just go ahead and introduce him, and then we'll let him tell you a little bit about it, about himself, or tell a little bit about Fort Congaree. I'm going to tell you about him. So James Stewart is a registered professional archaeologist, an RPA. He's working for New South Associates. He has 15 years of experience, which includes prehistoric and historic southeastern archaeology, supervising all phases of archaeological study. His areas of expertise include colonial South Carolina, southeastern archaeology, woodland archaeology, and naval stores archaeology, and Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. He has participated in archaeological projects in Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. He has his MA and BA in anthropology from the University of South Carolina, and during his graduate studies, he conducted an archaeological investigation at Fort Congaree 1, and he taught weekend field schools at the site. He is the past president of the Archaeological Society of South Carolina, and he is currently secretary of the Cayce, he's on our commission, he's the secretary for our Cayce Historical Commission. James, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Andy, would you mind killing the lights along the backside too?
Sure.
All right, hey everybody. My name's James, and today I'm going to be talking about Fort Congaree, Old Fort Congaree, or as some people call it, Fort Congaree 1. So the presentation that I'm going to be offering this evening, going to go over kind of a large amount of information, and I'm going to try to keep it as narrative focused as I can, but we're going to divide this up into, let's call it two main parts. The first part is going to be the historic context for the Fort Congaree trading factory. The reason that we're going to talk about that is because the fort is actually established as a trading factory in a very specific period of time for very specific reasons. So you need to know a few of those details to understand how the fort gets set up. That's going to include some information about the Indian trade, the Embassy War, and the post-Embassy War deerskin trade. The next part of the presentation is going to focus on the archaeological investigations at Fort Congaree. That's going to include work from James Mickey in 1989, touch a little bit on what was found right next to the fort in 1974, and then some of the field work that was conducted in 2010 through 2013, and then we'll look at the features that were identified there for those of y'all that don't know. Features are essentially parts of an archaeological site that are movable. So we're talking about, in this case specifically, ditches that enclose the fort or the building foundations. And there's some artifacts that I've selected for y'all to take a look at that have a little bit of bearing as to how the fort is interpreted, especially identifying it in the right chronological period. And then we'll talk about the ground-penetrating radar study that we did last fall. I have some results of that I'm going to share, and then kind of bring all of that together to see a very wonky sketch of what I think the fort looked like circa 18, 17, 20. So that'll be covered in the interpretations part of the presentation. So, first thing that we really need to foreground here is that Fort Congaree is not located in the middle of nowhere. There were a lot of Native Americans living in this area all the way up until the Embassy War, and they have a long period of interaction with the site that Fort Congaree is located at. So this is the earliest artifact that has been collected from Fort Congaree, and it dates back to the late Archaic period. The map on my left is a map of all of the Mississippian and late pre-contact sites that have been identified in South Carolina to date. So just to kind of give you a sense of how much these people were present in the landscape, these are all of the sites where we have confirmed artifacts dating to those periods. There's a little bit of a concentration here that's artificial, and that's to do with the federal government requiring archaeological surveys that give us a higher kind of number of archaeological sites found in those areas. But you can certainly see the outline of Fort Jackson right here. This is the Francis Marion National Forest. But this area in particular, that is going to be where the embassy moved to in the 1680s. So that's certainly a significant area for the later historic period, or the later pre-contact historic transition. So when the colonists showed up in 1670, they weren't moving into an area that was uninhabited, and they were actually kind of banking on that because they had an economic focus on providing food and the basic materials that the colonies that were producing sugar in the Caribbean couldn't make on their own. So they needed a lot of labor. And one of the earliest things that the colonists are interested in doing is getting enslaved labor out of the Native Americans that are living there. They take those enslaved Native Americans, they send them to the Caribbean, and then they exchange them for Africans that are going to be helping them build things like the rice fields along the lower coastal plain. So, 1670, for those of y'all that don't know, I'm sure everybody in here is vaguely recalling this at least, is the year that Charleston was founded. That is the main port for the Carolina colony, and that colony doesn't really resemble what our state looks like today. It actually ran all the way up to this purple line here and all the way down to this one. And that was for two reasons. The first reason was that there was Jamestown and the Virginia colony right here. So, if you're looking at a modern day map, this is the North Carolina-Virginia border. They moved the line to the north of this earlier Peyton so that they could incorporate some settlements that were already here in that Albemarle Sound area, and have a kind of a little bit of industry already paying taxes. The southern boundary that they moved down there, they really just did that to make the Spanish and the French mad. St. Augustine is right here. So they're saying that, essentially, right up to your doorstep, we're claiming that for the king. And later on in the about 1700, the French, who are already active in this area, are going to found Mobile right here. And this is a map of Mobile around about 1720. About the same vintage for these two maps. But you've got Castillo y San Marcos right here, and St. Augustine basically running through here. And Charleston, or Charlestown as it was called in 1670, is right here. This is the Port Royal Sound, and that was actually the first location considered for the new colony's capital. So, well, how do the Lords Proprietors get these lands? They're friends of the king. They helped him during the Restoration, when after about 15, 20 years of the Commonwealth being run by a parliamentary system, the Stewarts come back as a constitutional monarch, and Charles II awards anybody that helped his family out during the English Civil Wars or afterwards while they were in kind of exile in Europe. He awards them lands and grants in the United Kingdom area and also in North America. So the other significant thing here to just kind of point out that this isn't a a Mayflower moment. Most of the guys that come to settle in Charlestown in 1670, they're from Barbados. They're second generation colonists. They've been through all of the settlement of these sugar colonies in the Caribbean, and they've got their heads kind of oriented towards making money, generating some products that they can sell on the market. And they see that the colony of Carolina is the place where they can do that and do it profitably. All right, so the first two things really that they can make any money off of in the colony are the Indian trade, which is the enslavement of Native Americans for transportation down to the Caribbean. There's a little bit of a side business for exchanging hides, but in the earliest era, the earliest decades of Carolina, they're kind of casting a wide net as far as what kind of hides they want. They're bringing beaver pelts and raccoon skins, and they haven't really identified deer skin as the kind of like the leading product. But it does kind of come up to predominance around 1700. The other thing is naval stores, and what those are the mineral, well not mineral, but the timbers and the byproducts of timber that they need to keep ships afloat. So we're talking about the nice long leaf pine mast that is cut here. We're also talking about distillation of pitch pine into tar and pitch, so that things like rigging can be waterproofed. So at this point in the colony, what they're doing is they're kind of making the land turn a profit for them. They don't have enough capital accumulated to invest in labor to do these larger rice projects straight off the bat. So what they're trying to do is get that money together so that they can then go into buying slaves so that they can dig the ditches that they need to irrigate these fields and do it in an efficient and profitable way. So in the 1670s, the other thing that the Carolina colony does is it steps on the Virginia traders' toes. These guys have been trading down what's called the Occaneechi Path for several decades at this point. They're trying to actually go around the group of Native Americans called the Occaneechi to get to the Cherokee, because I've heard rumors that they're a very large group and that they are somebody that they want to supply their goods to, so that they can make a lot of money in the process. Well, when Carolina sets up their fundamental charter, they basically say that this is our imaginary line. Anybody from Virginia, if you want to trade past this imaginary line, you have to come to Charleston and get a permit to do it. So you can imagine there weren't a whole lot of people that were up for that. So 1670 to about 1700, the Indian trade is kind of like spiraling downwards into this really dark and kind of violent cycle of manipulation, put it that way. The way that the Indian trade starts to work is that a trader will buy a bunch of trade goods on loan from some merchant in Charlestown. Then they will haul them out to the various Native American villages in mostly around the coastal plain, but they'll go all the way out to modern day Alabama. And they'll kind of drop those goods off and say, well, I'll be back in 6 months. You're going to owe me 25 deerskins. And if you don't have those deerskins when he's ready to come by and collect, he's going to charge interest on that. So now you owe him 50 deerskins, something along those lines. And say this goes on for a few years. Okay, well, you can't pay me the 1,000 deerskins you owe me, so why don't you just give me your son? And that'll wipe the slate. So these debt relationships that get established are making a lot of Native Americans mad, and they're complaining to the lords proprietors, and the lords proprietors are trying to get the colonists to kind of back off and treat the Native Americans better. But it really takes up until about 1707 for them to set up some kind of regulatory body for the Indian trade. And that was called the Board of Commissioners. And essentially, if Native Americans had issues with specific traders, they could go to the Board of Commissioners and put a complaint in, and then the commissioners would kind of adjudicate the complaint. They also sent out an Indian agent, and his job was to kind of go to all of the outlying towns and make sure that the traders were behaving. So things still continue to go poorly. 1715, there's what's called the Yamasee War, and this is a very difficult time for the Carolina colony. At this point, a lot of the settlements for the English and the French-speaking folks that were living in the colony were very spread out. They didn't have a lot of connectivity between the different settlements. Jamestown up on the Santee River is days away from Charlestown, which is also, days away from Port Royal. So in 1715, when the Yamasee War breaks out, it forces all of those folks to abandon those settlements and move back to Charleston, and it very nearly causes the colony to fail. But I do want to read you one quote before I move on, because there's kind of getting back to those Virginia traders. This is John Lederer, who's coming out of Virginia in 1670. The same year they're founding Charlestown. The Indian trade is so well established at this point, he's giving other people advice as to how to do it. So he's saying, in dealing with the Indians, you must be positive and at a word, for if they persuade you to fall anything in your price, they will spend time in higgling your further abatements and seldom conclude any bargain. So they're basically saying they're pretty savvy negotiators. Sometimes you may, with brandy or strong liquor, dispose of them to a humor of giving you 10 times the value of your commodity, and at other times they are so hidebound. I don't think that's a pun, but it kind of seems like one at this day looking back. They're so hidebound that they will not offer half the market price, especially if they be aware that you have a design to circumvent them with drink, or that they think you have a desire to their goods, which you must seem to slight and disparage. And then to the remoter Indians, you must carry another kind of truck, which is the stuff you're supposed to bring with you. Small looking glasses, those are mirrors, pictures, beads and bracelets of glass, knives, scissors, and all manner of gaudy toys and knacks for children, which are light and portable. For they are apt to admire such trinkets and will purchase them at any rate, either with their current coin of small shells, which they call Roanoke. Remember, this is a guy from Virginia, or Pete, or perhaps with pearls, vermilion, pieces of crystal, and towards usury, with some odd pieces of plate or bullion, which they sometimes receive in truck from the Westo. The Westo is a group that's living on Savannah River at this point. So, gives you a little bit of detail about what's going on with the Indian traders and how they're going about their activities. So during the Yamasee War, we looking back, call it the Yamasee War. The Yamasee is a group that lives right here in Port Royal. They're originally from the Panhandle of Florida. They moved up to Port Royal region in the 1680s, and they formed a pretty strong alliance with the colony for doing things like military raids against the Spanish allied groups that are living in the Panhandle and closer to St. Augustine. So in 1715, all of those frustrations that they're having kind of boil to a head, and they're not just frustrations that the Yamasee have. They're also frustrations of the Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Abicas, and all of these groups. Every one of them ally with the Yamasee and attack the Carolina colony. So we know that those participants in the attack, they didn't all show up at once and then hit the colony, but we do know that there was a good amount of coordination between the groups. So this is a couple of quotes from contemporary participants in the Embassy War. Cooper and McCord is actually the statutes of largest South Carolina. So this is the preamble to the law that they write to improve the conditions of the Indian trade. So basically saying the people whose fault it is are these Indian traders that are going out there. They're saying they lead loose and vicious lives to the scandal of the Christian religion, and do likewise oppress the people among whom they lie by their unjust and illegal actions, which if not prevented may in time tend to the destruction of this province. And looking at it from a retrospective perspective, in Hewitt, there's a judge that is from Carolina. He actually says that no, the Native Americans knew who they were indebted to, and if they figured if they killed all of them that they would be cleared of all of those debts. So that was the kind of the later 18th century perspective on things. All right, so the deerskin trade after the war, and I'll take one step back here to just say that the out-and-out conflict of the Yenisei War is largely over in about a year. The main reason that is curtailed, there's still raids going on into the 1720s and later, but the reason that it's curtailed really is because the colony sends a group of soldiers up to the Cherokee to seek out an alliance with them. And they come all the way from Charlestown, they go up to Fort Moore, they follow the river until they get up to the lower towns, and there's a village right here called Tougaloo. And the Tougaloo village, there was enough of the headmen of the Cherokee that they were able to hold a council that initially sought to just kind of get a pan-Indian peace treaty set up. There were two different groups in Tougaloo, though, two different groups of Cherokee. That one was interested in keeping their alliances with the English to the detriment of the Creeks that are living on the other side of the Savannah River over here. And the other group is just what they were calling the Peace Party. So the Peace Party prevailed in the early part of the discussions, and they actually sent for ambassadors from the Creek to come and negotiate with the colonial officials that are at Tougaloo. En route, some of the people that wanted to continue the war actually attacked those peace ambassadors, and it started off like a couple centuries of feuding between the Cherokee and the Creek. And that's what also kind of folds into our reason for Fort Congaree to be constructed, because Savannah Town right here is kind of like the primary hub for the trade in hides and Native American slaves up until the Embassy War. It's just on the Savannah River. This is actually where Augusta is today. You'll see there are a number of villages of different groups that are clustered around it. There's the Yuchi village, there's a group called the Savannah, and there's Appalachee that are living down just to the south of the main trading path. Well, the Cherokee, after they sign their alliance with the colony, say, we actually need a better route to get to Charleston where maybe we're protected from attacks by the creek. So why don't we help you build a fort about halfway at that old village of the Congarees, and you guys can man it, and we will do all of our trading there. So the Cherokee negotiated that as part of their treaty with the colony. And here's a description of the colony from the contemporary Secretary of State for the description of the fort from the contemporary Secretary of State. It says the fortress was only designed as a safeguard for goods and property belonging to the trade. It was of no more formidable construction than a common stockade enclosure. So what he's saying is that it's a palisaded outpost. It's not something that is really built to last. It's just kind of something that kind of give you a temporary defense against attacks by Native American raiders. So after the war, with the deerskin trade, the big part of the war is that Native Americans that are living within about 200 miles of Charleston are safe from enslavement. So the Cherokee can continue to raid the Iroquois, bring down those captives, and still sell them as slaves to traders. But pretty much anybody that's shown on this map, the colony says that we will no longer deal in them as slaves. So with that shift, the focus becomes the deerskin. And at this time, there's somewhere, I think the estimates are somewhere around 250,000 deer in the southeast. And they are about to get hit with a human wave of hunters that in about 20 or 25 years just completely devastate the population. So say there's a group of Cherokee that are going out to hunt deer and gather hides for the deerskin trade. What that really entails is perhaps 3 or 4 men going out with somebody's wife or sister or daughter. They will hunt all day, collect as many hides as they can, and then hand them over to their companion, who's essentially got to spend the next several weeks preparing those hides for sale. There were various ways that they would be prepared, depending on the way that the merchants in Charleston asked for them. They could either be just raw, they could be what they call half-dressed, which is where all the flesh is taken off of the inside of the hide, or they could be fully dressed where the flesh and the hair are taken off. So all of those